Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker. When I got the call that I was going to be a father in just 6 short weeks, my world turned from the corporate boardroom to social workers, background checks, parenting classes, lawyers, adoption agency representatives, and a host of others. I had no support. I had nowhere to turn. Over the past 30 years, I've come to find out that my story is all too common. Thank God for Replanted Ministry and the new book, Replanted, written by Jenn and Josh Hook, along with our good friend Mike Berry. Jenn Hook, Masters of Arts, is the founding director of replantedministry.org, a ministry that helps empower the church to support adoptive and foster families. After receiving her master's degree in clinical psychology from Wheaton College, she worked as a therapist for children in the foster care system. She's a trauma-specialized therapist and a trust-based relational intervention practitioner. She speaks frequently on topics related to adoption and foster care support, mental health and trauma, lives in Dallas with her husband, Josh. Here to discuss her new book, Replanted, a faith-based support for adoptive and foster families, is Jenn Hook. Jenn, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you're very welcome. So I'm an adopted father.
Yeah.
15-year-old runaway from Chicago. Parents were pressuring her to have an abortion. She ran away from Chicago to Southern California and decided that she was going to have the baby. And I got the call from the attorney 6 weeks before she was due. I had gone through, my partner's daughter asked me to adopt her, well, she was pregnant, to adopt her child, and I put her through counseling, and the counseling was to convince her to keep the baby and raise the baby and to equip her and to get her connected. And I did all that for her, and she came back and said, I've decided to keep the child, but I had to, in California, you have to attain, you can't, even if you work in the same office, you cannot negotiate directly with the birth mother. So I had to have an attorney as an intermediary, and all that was arranged. And so the file was closed. The book was closed. I wasn't, I was in my mid-30s. Never thought about having children, never thought about this process. She came to me and said, you'd make a great dad. I want you to be the dad of this child. That's what started the process. Closed the door, boom. 6 months went by, and I get a phone call from a lawyer that says, you're the only client that I have that can afford taking care of all the medical care, the delivery, the hospital, and the mother who needs a place to live and clothes and food and shelter and all these things. And the price tag is going to be this astronomical figure, and you're going to have to go through an agency, because in California you have to relinquish to an agency. There's so many things. All this in 6 weeks. Fortunately, I carried an FBI and United States Department of Defense clearance. Therefore, I was pre-cleared, and all I needed was a local sheriff's report, and I didn't have to go through the huge FBI background check, but that would have just delayed it even further. But I had nobody. I had no resource. I didn't even think to ask for support. It was a whirlwind 6 weeks, and 6 weeks later I brought home this baby who's now 30 and carrying a baby of her own at 25 weeks pregnant. So I've navigated these waters by myself and known all of the stories, including the inability to terminate the father's rights because the birth mother lied about the father, said he was in the military, and under a law that was enacted during World War II, you have to find the person, you have to go through the adjutant general's office in order to find somebody in the service for them to have their rights terminated. This added 6 months to the process to find the person, for him to deny that he was the father and had no claim, and we didn't know that it was all a lie. So What should have been a 90-day hearing wound up being 9 months of just pure agony, of wondering
Wow.
any minute she could have changed her mind, because until the judge rapped the gavel, there we were.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was it in your life that in your faith journey, and let's start there, that made you really drawn to this from a faith perspective? Because I wasn't a believer. I was a member of a synagogue. I'm Jewish, and I didn't come to faith until I was after the adoption. My daughter and I came to faith within 6 weeks of each other,
Yeah.
because I was a single dad.
Yeah.
But tell me your faith journey and what got you involved in this Replanted ministry.
Yeah, so I grew up in Canada in a Christian home, and so that was kind of always part of my life. And I always felt this really deep calling to just justice, and especially to vulnerable populations. And I really felt a strong calling to empowering local churches in this. And so when I got my master's degree, I was working as a therapist with kids. I had a real passion for working alongside kids and for just giving them voice to their experiences and what's happened in their lives. And I actually just kind of stumbled across the job. So I got a job offer working in a local foster care agency in Illinois. And it was working with kids and then also with birth parents that were trying to reunify with their kids and doing counseling with them. And it was during that time that God just kind of wrecked my life for just understanding the complexity of what our families have experienced, the limbo, all the emotions. And, I would sit in counseling rooms with my kiddos too and just see the agony of all the experiences that they had had. Kids that wanted to go home and couldn't, kids that had experienced horrendous abuses and neglect. I would sit with kids that were, foster care almost became their identity. I remember this one little boy telling me that he didn't want his foster parents to pick him up from school because he was afraid then his peers would ask questions, about, why your parents don't look like you. And I just started to realize, I would sit with kids and with parents, and they just felt so alone and so isolated. And I just kept thinking, where is the church in this? The church, we know the cause of the fatherless is so important to the heart of God. And our churches are very typically like, yes, we want kids to be in the love and safety of a family, and adoption and foster care is a beautiful thing, but not a lot of churches were showing up in the aftermath, after families were saying yes, and I just felt like the church needs to do more. We need to be walking alongside of our families and all the complexities of the journey. We know support is so crucial to helping families thrive. And so many of our families, so many times I would sit with parents that would say, like, people were excited when we said yes to the adoption journey or the foster journey. And then about 3 or 4 months in, their support systems had vanished altogether, and I just felt like as a church, we're missing a beautiful opportunity to be the hands and feet of Christ to our families. And so God just really put it on my heart to stay in the U.S. and to do something about it. And so that's how Replanted was formed.
You bring up such an interesting point. First of all, if the Bible says true religion is taking care of the widows and the orphans, in that orphan category is a orphan spirit, which foster children have an orphan spirit. Depending on the adoption process, if you're adopting an older child, you are also dealing with an orphan spirit. It is a spiritual condition. And the church does not recognize and this is not about condemnation, but this is about biblical truth. And this is calling things what they are for what they are. And this idea of a spiritual component to an orphan and applying true religion to being taken care of the spiritually orphaned puts a whole new dimension on the call of the church to respond not just with a meal, not just with doing some kind of GoFundMe account or food and clothing drive because, hey, they're just coming back from Ukraine, they're just coming back from China with their foster or their adopted child, and we want to make them feel. That season passes, but the orphan spirit and the spiritual support that adoptive families need, we travel a road that is so different. And I'll throw another one in there. My daughter's a C-section baby. There's a whole nother dynamic, and I'm sure you studied this in university. C-section babies are different than vaginal birth babies. They have never had that bonding that comes, and therefore that they are bondless, and so they haven't had this, and it releases these endorphins. These are bonding endorphins that make them feel that they are part of something. They haven't been compressed. They haven't had it squeezed out of them or into them, and therefore they don't know that. It's not their fault. They were C-section babies. So I have a C-section adopted daughter that struggles with this wanted belonging. Am I enough? Am I pleasing enough? Am I all of these things? And I don't know of a single church that has support groups, that has an established outreach for adoptive and foster families. And so I can't presume to know what all of the churches do, or if there are denominations that are better at it than others are. But what I do know is that there is a desperate need for support in this area.
Yeah.
Your husband, how did the two of you connect into this? And you know, it's in psychiatry, there's a condition called folie à deux. I don't know if when you studied, if you ever came across it, but it's a fantasy shared by two.
Yeah.
It's usually in a negative context of somebody thinks that they're Napoleon and their wife thinks they're Josephine, and they live out their lives as Napoleon and Josephine. Okay?
Yeah.
But there's also in the body, as we look at folie à deux, and call it ministry instead of fantasy, but ministry shared by two, it becomes something that's quite really unique, and you have that with Joshua.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Yeah, so I had been leading Replanted for a few years, and just seeing the desperate need for our churches to support our families in more tangible ways. And, you know, I think you touched on something really important, right? A lot of our kiddos have experienced trauma. It's almost impossible for a foster child or a child through adoption to have not experienced trauma. And trauma looks so different for everyone, but we know our kiddos can experience trauma in utero. So, you know, even a birth mom considering adoption for her child is under a significant amount of stress, and the baby is taking all that stress in. And then the attachment, the babies, they can hear, they're sensing everything going on in their mother's womb. And then you have that attachment rupture that happens. Kids that spend time in the NICU, medical traumas, like you talked about the C-section, right? Our brains are developing so rapidly, and that the senses that a kid takes in when they're first born, when they spend time in the NICU, there's some developmental impairment that happens as a result of that. And then you have kids that experience, you know, physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, and things like that, right? And so we know that our kiddos have experienced some really difficult things, a lot of ruptured love, attachment, trauma, and that shapes a lot of their emotions and behaviors as they're working through this healing process. And so, you know, when Josh and I started dating, he's also a therapist, and so his passion is really about God made us mind, body, and spirit, right? And so we need to be taking care of all of those needs, our mental health needs, our spiritual needs, our physical needs. And so as part of the emotional support that we offer through our groups, we really wanted to create an environment where parents and kids could come together and have moments where they can say, me too, I've experienced that. I know what you're going through. That is so freeing. But we wanted to create opportunities where families could come in and just experience an abundance of grace, because this journey is hard. What our kiddos have gone through and what they're healing from, that journey is long. There is no quick fixes. In foster care, there can be this whole limbo of, is a child going to be returning home? Are their parents going to, receive healing and be safe, healthy parents? There's so many emotions in that process of what's going to happen that our kids are living in. Foster parents as well, are they going home? Aren't they? What's happening? There's a huge amount of grief and loss in the adoption and foster care journey that everyone experiences, in addition to a lot of joy and preciousness and beauty. And so for Josh and I, we just felt like this is a really beautiful area to kind of integrate the whole person, to really care for our families well. And one of the cool things about my husband is he had actually written a book called Helping Groups Heal, that we use to help train all of our small group leaders, because we really wanted to create safe environments for our parents to come and be vulnerable and share the deep depths of their souls with one another, and know that they were safe to do that, and that they were going to receive an abundance of grace. And so he had already kind of been on one area that helped just create this very holistic ministry for us, so that we could really care for our families well. I'm sure you've experienced this, right? Where you share with somebody what's going on in your circumstances, and maybe they give you a judgment or criticism, or maybe they're really quick to give advice, right? We're all really quick to do that because we don't want to see people hurting that we love, right? And so, hey, have you tried this? And a lot of times our parents have tried all those things, and what they really need is just someone to be present and to give them grace and love and just be the hands and feet of Christ to them. And so we really, Josh and I together, really wanted to help empower the church to do that for our families and our kiddos well. And so that's kind of how we've partnered together in our marriage in this ministry.
Well, I think it's amazing what you're doing. It's an amazing resource. Replanted is not just the title of the book, but Replanted is really the ministry, small group support, how to plant a small group, how to operate a small group, how to bring to the local church, equipping the local church for this work. Foster care is incredibly different than adoption, and the foster system is a social services system, and every state, city, and locale have different rules, regulations, requirements, and things like that. One of the things that they all share that I found out about as being planning a congregation was that the family court system needs safe places for families to meet in a supervised setting. And there is a great lack. And most of our more established churches have playgrounds, have meeting rooms, and can be places where, unfortunately, it's on days they're not usually open. Now, I was a synagogue, so we were open Friday night for services and Saturday morning for services, but I offered our facility to the local court system, to the family courts, to say, when you have, because we have so many classrooms, I had a very large congregation, we have so many classrooms, we can actually have 25 supervised visitations going on at the same time, and there's enough toys and equipment, and if you tell us the age groups, we'll get them into the right part of the education wing to be able to have the resources so that dad can interact, or mom can interact, or mom and dad are allowed time under supervision with the social worker. And so I went to the local family court, to the guardian ad litems, and said, I want to offer our playground. I want to offer our facility for supervised visitations. And they were startled. They were stunned that anybody would approach them to say, we know you have a need. McDonald's is the place where foster families or other visitation takes place. That's the place because they have a playground or a Chick-fil-A. That is the place of choice, when really, if you wanted the best possible place, it would be a church facility. If the family doesn't go to church there, who cares? This building is unoccupied, it's unused, it's space, and the fact that I just need somebody either on the custodial staff or in the truth of the matter was, I just went ahead and came there and was in my office and made myself available while the social worker or the guardian ad litem or whoever it was had the family had their supervised time. They would sit off in a corner. All of our rooms were video monitored. Some of them decided to use and let them have time together in private, but monitor them by video. But that's the least. That's the least a church. I live in Birmingham, Alabama. 1 million people, 2,500 churches. Do you not think that the local counties don't need more than McDonald's and Chick-fil-A to have places for visitation? That's the least we can do as the church, is provide a safe place for families to meet, let alone take it to the point of replanted. There's some real minimal things that the church is not doing in the community that as someone who was willing to do it, they looked at me and they were like tears from these social workers saying, we can't believe that you would do this for us. No one has ever walked into the court system and said, I want to volunteer a facility that has all this equipment, all these toys, all these videos, all these things that parents can do with their children. I want to offer that to you. And it was shocking to them because nobody had ever done that before. That pierced, it was like a stake in my heart. What do you mean I'm the first person to ever do this?
Yeah.
It is such a critical problem, and statistically, because I want our audience, and we are a global audience, and right now we're prime time in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. We then rebroadcast throughout the day, so we're hitting every culture, every time zone, every locale throughout the world with this broadcast. Statistically, in the United States, how many children are we talking about in the adoptive or foster family system?
I mean, over 1 million. In foster care alone, I think in Illinois, it's about 400,000. So every state is different, but there's tons of kids in foster care. There's millions of children around the world that are in orphanages or living on the streets. So there's definitely roles that the church can play in supporting families and supporting kids that need families.
We're one of the ministries we support deals with 30 million orphans on the Ganges River. Just 30 million children.
Yeah,
orphans.
I know, eh?
Yeah, just 30 million in one small region of India. We're talking with Jenn Hook, co-author along with her husband Joshua and our good friend Mike Berry, author of a new book called Replanted, Faith-Based Support for Adoptive and Foster Families, that takes you on a very deep dive through an understanding of what the church's role, and it is an unspoken, untapped, desperate need in the community to take this out of social services and put this into a Christ-centered focus where we can get families support by the church in small groups, structured small groups where there can be equipping and understanding and ways to get support for this much needed and much untapped resource. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to dig into some of the concepts that are introduced in Replanted and what the church needs to do and what you, as the individual watching this program, need to do even after this program airs, after you've read Replanted, that you would take the initiative to go to your pastor and say, I want to do this here. That is the call to action of this interview with Jenn Hook. We'll be right back. Not everything that makes the headlines has biblical importance, but many events that happen around the world do, and you never hear about them. Igniting a Nation is pleased to teach Revealing Prophecy every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at the Marriott 280 in Birmingham. We will cover worldwide events and insider information that will connect the dots of what's happening around the world with biblical prophecy. If you happen to miss a class, we'll televise each week's class at 10 o'clock Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our social media outlets. Copies of the teachings will also be available to purchase on our website at www.ignitinganation.com. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting a Nation's new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, but nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of two Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan, in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color, and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.ignitinganation.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. We take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking to Jenn Hook, one of 3 authors of the new book, Replanted. She, along with her husband Josh and our good friend Mike Berry, have authored this book and created this program for small groups and for churches to get involved. It's a faith-based support for adoptive and foster families, both for the individual and for the church to get involved and get the support they so desperately need. Jenn, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Jenn, break it down for me, if you will, the concept of Replanted.
Yeah, so Replanted really is about providing support to foster and adoptive families, both parents and the kids. And we do that in three different ways. So there's kind of three pillars of support that we recommend. One is tangible support, which is, adoption costs are high. They're super expensive, but it just doesn't stop there. A lot of times there's tangible needs in terms of self-care and, being able to go out and have a babysitter come into the home and being able to afford that. There's medical expenses, OT expenses. There's a lot of things that add up in tangible ways. And so tangible support is really important for our families. The second one is informational support. I hinted at this a little earlier, but we know a lot of our kids have experienced trauma, and we know that trauma impairs the neurobiology in their brains. And so our kiddos, if you look at a brain scan of a kid that has experienced trauma versus a child who hasn't, those brain scans look drastically different. And there's great hope because we know our kiddos can experience healing, but that can take a while because we know that trauma, our kids have a harder time regulating their feelings, using executive functioning skills, language, things like that, attaching, right? And so that attachment cycle has been disrupted for our kids. If you think about a baby that's born and they cry, mom comes, picks up that baby, right? And so that baby learns to trust. They know that their cries, their voice matters, that they're heard. And a lot of our kiddos, their cries went unanswered. And so they learn to rely on only themselves. And so, and we know in the brain, we have this fancy part of our brain called the amygdala, and that's the survival part of our brain. And in there is our fight, flight, or freeze. And so a lot of our kiddos who have experienced something really hard kick into that fight, flight, or freeze mentality very quickly. They can get triggered very quickly in that way. And it's heartbreaking stuff. And it's confusing. But a lot of times that our kiddos can't talk out, they act out. And so we can see them just wrestling with what their experiences have been. And so informational support is super important. It's important to understand how trauma has impacted our kids. Our kids are not bad, misbehaved, deregulated kids. Okay, they are kids with complex histories and experiences far beyond what any of us have had to cope with or deal with. And so it's important that we become trauma informed. And so when we talk about informational support, we're talking about that. Becoming trauma informed, adapting our parenting skills, having our churches understand trauma and what foster and adoptive kiddos coming into Sunday school might be experiencing and how to help them and how to see their preciousness. These kids are great, they're awesome, but we need to know how to also help them in their healing process. And then the third area of support that we do for Replanted is the emotional, spiritual support. We know that it is so life-giving to sit with people that understand the experiences that we've been to, and same with our kids, that they can sit in a room with other kids who are maybe part of a transracial family, or maybe they've never met their birth father and they're wrestling with that, or maybe they were in foster care and they weren't able to reunify with their family, and they're reconciling these feelings of like, why didn't my parents get off drugs so they could get me back, right? These are really complex things our kids have gone through. And just as much for parents that are trying to also be in this story and in this journey, they have very unique experiences as well. And so it's really important that we surround our families with this emotional, spiritual support where we can create this environment where they can be authentic with their journeys, but also receive great hope and encouragement in their journeys.
How many groups are there now?
We have about 40 around the country right now. We're launching ones on an ongoing basis. So we originally started in Chicago, and we saw such a need there, and we said, let's create support, because I'm not going to tell a family that they should join, start the adoption journey or the foster journey unless I have a support system to plug them into. And so that was super important for us, that we empowered the church to be able to support our families, because we know that'll help them thrive. And so we started in Chicago and really quickly grew to 10 groups because our families were so desperate to be in relationship with one another. It's been really fun actually to see a lot of our families have become best friends with one another. They're hanging out all the time. We have some groups out in the West Coast in Seattle, and there was a conference one weekend. And so they had to delay their group. Their group was meeting the third Friday of every month, and they had to push it back one week because of this conference. And this family told their kids, like, hey, we're not having group this week, we're having it the week after. And the boy started crying because he wanted to see his friends so bad. This group is so important to him and his story. And so We are helping now empower local churches all over the U.S. to launch groups to support our families better.
Are you finding that there is a denominational thread? Are you finding that there's any continuity in who's attracted to wanting to get involved in this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say a lot of like evangelical Christians are typically getting involved. But the thing about Replanted is we know the cause of the fatherless is something that can really unify the church. And so our heart is really that the church links arms. And so when we build groups in a community, we're asking churches to partner together and collaborate to bring this resource to their community. And so it doesn't matter what church you attend, any of our families are welcome to join a group. And I think that's been a really cool part of what we're able to offer. I'd also say sometimes churches sideline themselves from supporting families because maybe they don't have a critical mass or they don't have the budget, or there's different ways or reasons that churches can't always support foster and adoptive families in tangible ways. In the Replanted model, we say, hey, we all know we have a role to play, and if we partner together, we can do more together. And so the model has really given smaller churches a way to really be involved in the ministry, because sometimes churches, might only have one or two foster adoptive families, right? And so they're not necessarily able to create a whole ministry for maybe just two families. But when they're with Replanted, and it's a faith-based support for the community, for churches in the community, that opens up a lot of opportunities for churches to do different things to support our families.
Jenn, I'm thrilled to be a part of the launch of this book and of this concept, and to really throw the gauntlet down to every part of our audience that says that every community has a foster family problem.
Mm-hmm.
We want to say, we don't want to frame things in negative terms, but these social workers are overworked. These social workers are underpaid. They are adding to their plates more families. There's less home visits. There's more people who are a part of an antiquated system that is self-perpetuating, that's an industry. It's a cottage industry. There are people who make their living, their livelihood by being foster parents and taking on more. It's less regulated, it's less supervised, it's less managed. And if you wind up having a child who goes into the system, there are systemic issues in somebody going into the system. This offers not an alternative, but a support that allows you to, if you're thinking about becoming a foster family, this is the kind of program you need to understand the contents excuse me, of this book first, and then begin to do the research that say, even before I start the process, are there others around me who are in the process that I can come alongside of? It is mentoring, it is supporting, it is the church's call to a group that, quite honestly, I would venture to say is they might No, I can honestly say in the hundreds of churches I've been in, I don't recall foster parents bringing foster children to church on a very large scale basis. And the families that are fostering 5, 6, or even 7 children are not using the church as a part of that support system. Whether it's because they've been shunned, whether it's because they've been rejected, whether because in many of the communities, it is inner city, it is drug related, it is family abuse related. There is a stigma in many of the foster care programs. There's a lot of uneducating and then a lot of re-educating that needs to be done. Does Replanted assist in that?
Yeah, so I think you were touching on some really big things there, because the education piece is really important. There is a uniqueness to the adoptive and foster journey that is really important to understand. So whether you're even considering the journey, this book is really helpful in understanding trauma, attachment, wisdom, and discernment in whether you should step forward in this, and then also the types of support. But churches have also been sometimes a place, like you mentioned, of pain for our families. I had a little boy who was 7 years old, who his sister had been sexually abused, and he carried such guilt and shame that he wasn't able to protect his sister from mom's boyfriend for the abuse, so much so that he would break windows trying to get shards of glass so that he could hurt himself. This is not a bad kid. This kid is precious, but he has had some horrendous experiences in his life. And so it's really important that we as churches, that we understand how trauma impacts our kiddos so that we can meet their needs better. When they come to Sunday school, that we're saying, hey, we are here, we're ready, we're excited for you to be here. There's no behavior, there's no emotion that's too big for us, because we love you so much that we got equipped to understand how to meet your needs while you're in this healing process. And so education is a huge part of that. So we do that. I do trainings all the time on trauma and attachment and how to engage the church in this healing process for our families. That's huge. With our groups, all of our child care mentors go through our trauma training, because you cannot love our kiddos well without saying, I've got to love and understand what you experience so I can always see your preciousness beyond the mess. That's so important. And that's a way that churches can get engaged as well, right? There are a lot of organizations doing really cool things. Show Hope hosts Empowered to Connect, which is a simulcast your church can host, and it's all trauma stuff, right? And so you can have your church staff participate in this. People in your congregation can come to this 2-day training you can host in your church, that equips everyone to understand what our foster and adoptive families are going through. Like, these are really important things, and those are relatively easy to do in comparison, And so the education piece is huge. It's definitely something that we offer and is really important.
According to Barna research, Christian families are more prone to take in foster children and adopt. But yet, the one resource that they should have that is the equivalent of that, the support system for the Christian family that is more prone to adopt, more prone to foster care, should be the church. Mm-hmm. And it's not. And that troubles me. Mm-hmm. As you talk to pastors, as you hopefully are getting invited to these mega church conferences, as you are getting connected, I am hoping, with the mega voices, this is a mega issue. Mm-hmm. When you're talking about millions of children, you're talking about a mega issue, okay? Mm-hmm. In America, you're talking about a mega issue. This is the church's business. This is what the church is supposed to do. This is what the church is supposed to be for. Are you being received? Are you getting the kind of reception? Do you have champions out there? Are the John Maxwells grabbing a hold of this and saying, this is leadership 101, this is mentorship 101, this is the lowest level of leadership that's going to raise up the next generation and the coming generations of youth leaders that have experienced all that needs to be experienced, and they can become the greatest and most powerful witnesses because they are the true overcomers. They have overcome things that you and I cannot, well, you and I can conceive of because we've seen it and experienced it and worked with it, but there are things that are just beyond, and a lot of people don't want to know. They just don't want to know. But are you getting the kind of exposure and the kind of press and the kind of support at the higher levels? Is this something that somebody is championing with alongside of you? I know that Mike is, of course, as a part of this, and he's a great champion to have, and we love having him on the program. But are you getting traction?
Yeah, I would say it's a mix, right? So as you were saying, like, I think there's so much more to do. So I would say what's happening right now is there is a big movement with the church to support families. So we are seeing a lot more churches saying, like, yes, we recognize that our message has to go beyond the cause of the fatherless is important to the heart of God, and you should consider adoption or foster care. It has to go beyond to showing up in the trenches and showing up in the messes and the stuff that's not glamorous with our families. So I would say there's so much more work to be done. For us, we have a lot of people, actually more than we can keep up with a lot of times, that want to launch groups. We have a lot of churches that are like, hey, we want to do something. We haven't known how to do it. The Replanted model has the how, and so we're really working to help empower local churches. What I would say, though, is it's typically parents or people who have worked in child welfare or foster and adoptive parents that are first the ones saying, hey, this is important and you need to pay attention, and then getting the pastors on board. But a lot of times it's the foster and adoptive parents themselves that are continuing to champion this. And I would really, let me tell you, our parents are tired. They are worn out. They are running to 1 million appointments with their kids. Their bank accounts are empty. But the thing is, they're tired. They're worn out. They're running to 1 million appointments. They are in the trenches helping their kiddos heal from their experiences. And what I would really love to see is people who are not foster or adoptive parents, pastors, friends, church communities say, I want to take this initiative. I want to create this ministry for you, to bless you, to love on you. And so that is really where I see a lot of times support systems sometimes will say, well, I don't feel called to be a foster or adoptive parent, as if somehow that sidelines them or disqualifies them from being able to do something. And I think that is the exact opposite. That's most what qualifies you when you have a heart and you have hands that are eager and ready and willing to serve and love. Because it's hard when you're the person that needs the care to also be trying to give it or create that network of care and support. And so I think, what you were saying is it's a little bit of both and. We see a lot of people eager. I have a lot of churches that are joining Replanted and getting groups going and building that into their ministries. But there's so much more work that needs to be done. And I really see the need being people who are not foster adoptive families really stepping into this in an intentional way.
There are people who are looking for a way to use their gifts. And there's spiritual gift inventories that talk about somebody having a gift of compassion, but they're not finding a compassionate area. The jobs are full, or somebody's been in this pastoral role for so long, and so they're frustrated with their congregation because they're just not using their gifts. This is a way for you to use an administrative gift, a gift of compassion. As you go through the list of gifts, there's not a single gift that cannot be employed in the list of spiritual gifts. And so I'm talking to an audience right now and sending a message to you that if you're in a congregation and you don't feel like your gifts are being used, I want you to get a copy of Replanted, and I want you to read this and see if it's the call that you've been waiting for. You want to be called, you want to be used of God, but you just don't know where the greatest need is. Nobody's approached you. Well, guess what? I'm approaching you. Jenn is approaching you. Josh is approaching you. Mike Barry's approaching you. The foster child is approaching you. The adoptive child is approaching you. There is a need out there in every community in North America. Absolutely huge need, and it needs to be addressed. I want to encourage each and every one of you.
Mm-hmm.
Jenn,
I think too, what I was going to
yes.
say, The book also, we talk about how to support at an individual level as well. So, there's a ton of information in there on how the church can be involved and support families. But also, if you're somebody and you're a grandparent to a child who has entered into the foster adoptive journey, a friend, an aunt, or an uncle, support them, show them how much you love them by becoming informed, understanding the uniqueness of their journey, understanding how you can support and love their kids by being consistent, by being invested in their lives, continue to show up with our families. I think that message is so important. So,
Jenn, the resources that you offer at Replanted Ministry through your website, replantedministry.org, you help people find a group, you help people start groups, you share stories, you give volunteer opportunities. What do you need, you as a ministry need, and what is your ask? And I want to give you the opportunity. I don't do this for ministries, okay? We're a ministry. Igniting a Nation is a ministry, and we are a platform to give a voice to those that don't have a global voice, that would not have the opportunity to reach a global audience, and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people hearing of this for the very first time. So what is it you really need?
I would say a few different things. Our ministry has grown so much that we can't really keep up with the demand almost. So there's just even financial resources that we need, because we're constantly doing trainings, and we have team members writing discipleship curriculums for our families and curriculums for our kids, and we're training up and empowering local churches to really take on this ministry to support families. So that's one really big need. The second, I would say, is we constantly are looking for volunteers that can really show up, that can attend these monthly groups, that can do hospitality, provide meals, that can show up and be a child mentor for different age groups, and that can do that with consistency. Because here's the thing, our kiddos don't need more people coming in and out of their lives every other month. They need people that are invested in them and that'll show up every month, and that they can look forward to seeing them and saying, hey, that is my leader of my group, and they love and care for me. And so we are always looking for volunteers that are willing to roll up their sleeves and love our families in really tangible ways. So whether that's doing hospitality, helping get our groups organized, being a mentor at our groups, those are really important things. I think one of the biggest needs our families have, almost none of our families have time for self-care. That's so huge. Our kiddos sometimes have really high needs, and so it can be really hard to find people that are able or feel equipped to sometimes take care of them, so that parents can go out and do what they need to do to recharge. And so if that's something where you feel like, hey, I can do that consistently for a family every month, and I'm willing to become trauma informed, that is a huge need that we have as well. Our families rarely get that time to recharge, and it's important. Self-care is like breathing. If you're only ever breathing out, which a lot of our families are doing, you're not going to make it, right? You need the breath in and the breath out. And so help give our families an opportunity to breathe in so that they can keep breathing out to their kiddos.
The book is called Replanted. The ministry is replantedministry.org. There is a Contact Us page that says, just ask for your name, your email, and your message needs to be, I would love to help. I want to get this started. I know somebody in the Billy Graham Association. I know somebody who is the head of the ARC. I know somebody who is the head of this denomination. I know somebody who can impact 1,000 churches. I know this world-famous author that loves children and wants to reach children, and I can connect you with them. Be a ministry changer by connecting others with people that can help them. Help a family, help a church, help a community, help a city, help a child. No matter how you do this, your help is desperately needed by millions of children who need you. And there are people out there who desperately want to be needed. this is your answer. The book is called Replanted, Faith-Based Support for Adoptive and Foster Families. The website is replantedministry.org. Jenn Hook, I cannot thank you enough for your heart, for you and Josh, for what you're doing, and this desperate need, and I hope this is a clarion call for every church pastor, for every minister, for every member, to hear this cry and this desperate need. We don't have one of these in Birmingham, Alabama. I just looked. There isn't one, and there needs to be one. We have 1 million people here. 78% of you go to church on Sunday, and you don't have one in your church. We need this here, right here in Birmingham, Alabama. Jenn Hook, thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was great to share and talk about this passion together.
God bless you, my friend. Thank you.